My father was really not much of a theologian or a philosopher, but like a lot of the elders of rural Kentucky, he maintained a treasure trove of proverbs that helped him to navigate the complexities of life. Often when he faced a shortcoming either in his own life or in the life of one of his small circle of friends, he would say, well, you know, there's only been one perfect person, and they killed him. During my graduate school training in seminary, I discovered that narrative that described that one person as having been perfect was kind of a useful fiction. Still, he was enough more perfect than the people around him that he was, in fact, killed. I can't recall what first brought the lyrics of Leonard Cohen's anthem to my attention, but the lines, "Forget your perfect offering, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." That caught my attention. Forget trying to be perfect. More realistically, please forget about trying to convince yourself or others that you are always innocent, because you're not. And please, please, please stop the perpetual multi-generational lie that people try to get us to repeat about our parents, that they did the best that they could. I didn't. I could have been a better father. I know that my parents could have done better if they'd tried. The more I get to know you folks, the more I'm certain that your parents could have done better if they tried. No one does the best that they could. The only virtue to be found in that arena is that you might desire to do better, that you might want to improve, rather than constantly polishing your alibis. Give up on your pretense that you have done your best. There's a crack in everything. Everyone is broken in one way or another. The Cheshire Cat is just being frankly honest. We're all mad here. Cohen's anthem makes the claim that the cracks are where the light comes in, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about that because mental illness is serious. Autism is serious. Addiction is serious. Depression is serious. Look, folks, suicide is now one of the top 10 causes of death in America. You can't just post a meme about how, you know, in Japan, when a pot is broken, they mend it with gold so that the cracks become the most beautiful aspect of the pottery. Folks, you're not a potted plant. Most of you are not a potted plant. But still, it's true that our brokenness really is part of who we are. Our failures are more instructive to us than our successes. I'll be very frank with you. I learned a lot more about marriage by going through a divorce than I did in all of my graduate school classes in marriage and family therapy. And I learned a lot more about theology and psychology by being fired a decade ago than I learned about religion in my postdoctoral studies at Harvard. There's something very educational about failing hard, about crashing. The mortality rate is 100%. We're all going to die somehow. Statistically, most of us will die from either heart disease, cancer, or respiratory illness. But of all the lethal factors in the world, suicide is the only one that's actually rising on the list to make it into the top 10. We're making improvements in all of the other causes of death, and we're doing worse when it comes to suicide. Suicide is more common than death from car accidents now, more common than death from gun violence. So isn't it about time that we start to get really honest about where it hurts? Now, this is the DSM-3, the third edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses, or Mental Disorders. I'm almost 40 years behind since there's now a DSM-5 on your desk and the desks of most professionals, but my other primary text is nearly 2,000 years old, so I have not felt the need to update my DSM. When I was doing my clinical placement in a mental health center during my graduate school education, the state of Kentucky was trying to trim their mental health budget, which both the federal government and state governments everywhere are trying to take money out of mental health while constantly decrying the state of mental health care. But the legislature passed a budget that said they would no longer pay for services rendered to people with these diagnoses, and that accounted for almost all of our clients at the mental health center where we worked. So one long night in Bowling Green, Kentucky, we all took out all of our files, opened our DSMs, and re-diagnosed all of our clients with a disorder that the state of Kentucky would pay for. Now, I know that that sounds fraudulent, but it's not nearly as fraudulent as the DSM itself. Say amen, brother, would you? Thank you. Because, folks, this is not a physics textbook. This is not a math book. It's more in line with philosophy and theology. The DSM is not based so much on research as it's based on the collective opinions of therapists who sit in their offices all day talking with people who've come to them for their help. It's much more opinion than it is science. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
One of my friends at Harvard that taught psychology wrote a book entitled "They Say You're Crazy," and it was all about how crazy the people were that wrote the DSM and how much science is not in it. I've worked in a mental health center. I have known the therapists there fairly well, and you give me 15 minutes and I could diagnose every one of them with a major character disorder, one or another, and one or two of them with a psychosis. I don't mean to name names, but I'm just saying, if you want to look at people that way, it's possible. But then I hail from a profession in which most of the practitioners believe in invisible angels and demons and an invisible heaven and hell, so my roots go deep into a lack of orientation to reality. There are more crazy people on my side of the fence than there are crazy people on your side of the fence, but we're all mad here. Everyone is, if not broken, at least cracked. Sadly, many people allow themselves to become so aware of the brokenness in others and so blissfully unaware of the brokenness in themselves that they become increasingly isolated, judging first this person and then that one until they find themselves almost entirely alone. Folks, we live in a nation of 350 million people. And one of the primary sources of suffering is loneliness. That's just crazy. Now, when it comes to the issue of suicide, research gives us a few clues as to what is leading so many people down that dark path. There are reasons in many cases, you know, and I understand, people with an incurable illness or an unbearable social humiliation or economic despair. But most often, and Paul's a forensic researcher in this arena, most often in suicides, what we find primarily is social isolation. We see people who don't want to be a burden to others, people who have lost any sense of self-worth, that they have no purpose, that they're not needed, that they don't belong anywhere. Many do not have access to appropriate mental health care. Now, there are outliers. Paul did a lecture publicly on this topic, and I was holding up my hands. You ignored me, brother. I don't want to.
You know how the lights get.
Yeah, lights are in your eyes. But all of these factors that I'm talking about don't really apply to some of the high-profile cases. Anthony Bourdain, or Kate Spade, or Robin Williams, they had access to mental health care. They had resources. They had connections. They surely had a sense of self-worth. But sometimes there's not a good explanation in some suicides. There's just not. I remember a psychiatrist I studied under who said some fish were born to swim upstream. Some people just have a chronic, painful experience of depression that never goes away, and sometimes they just don't make it. But here's what I really want to say today. I've worked in mental health. I've worked mostly in addiction treatment. From a pastoral role, I've also spent any number of hours in counseling with people who are struggling with depression or with their sexual orientation, with their history of their own sexual or physical abuse. And as a pastor, I've also been the victim of any number of people who would like to be career executioners who are clearly suffering from paranoia or narcissism, or most often a borderline personality disorder. I wish we had a warning buzzer at the door when someone with a borderline personality was coming in. I'm all in favor of greater access to mental health care or access to medications, a myriad of supportive treatments. But I am totally convinced that therapists, mental hospitals, and prescription drugs not only don't represent the total solution, they don't represent 10% of the solution. My good friend, Dr. Jim Davis, convinced me years ago through his research in positive psychology that neither talk therapy nor antidepressants were nearly as effective as having close friends and exercising in sunlight for 30 minutes a day.
Amen.
True enough? You should not rely on me for medical advice. As my daughter liked to tell her friends when she was little, my daddy is a doctor, but not the kind that can help anybody. But what my friends who are experts in this field of psychology and pharmacology do tell me is that the whole universe of serotonin drugs, Prozac, Zoloft, Celexa, Lexapro, Paxil, they all have very limited time periods of actual effectiveness. Now again, don't stop taking them because of what you hear me say today, because suddenly stopping any antidepressant can lead to a suicidal crash. But what researchers have convinced me of is that taking serotonin decreases your body's natural production of serotonin that is produced when you're exercising in sunlight. The benefits of taking serotonin can wear off as quickly as a month or two, but there continues to be a very serious danger of stopping because your body's not used to making it, and in the absence, depression can fall on you like a ton of bricks. Now, what Dr. Davis has suggested to Olympic athletes, which is when he began his research into these matters, was when he was the psychologist for the Olympic swim team. But for many years, he's been saying to his students and to some of his aging friends, is that if you will get 30 minutes of vigorous exercise outdoors, and I mean outdoors, whether it's cloudy, whether it's cold, if you can do it outdoors, it's much better than doing it indoors. The combination of natural light with exercise is more effective than any prescription medication for depression. I'm not talking about medications for bipolar disorder or psychosis. I'm talking about the SSRIs that promised so much when they came on the market 30 years ago. But the simple fact of the matter is that even though billions of pills have been consumed in our nation, the depression rate has gone up, the suicide rate has gone up, and the happiness quotient in our nation has gone down. And just to complicate things, your body cannot digest an SSRI. It all goes back into the water system. So if the fish seem different to you these days, there is a growing level of SSRIs in our water system that we can't get out. That's why they're telling you not to dump your pills in the toilet these days or to put them in the landfill, because some of these chemical elements simply do not go away. They just keep getting recycled. You're getting a certain amount of vitamin P Prozac every time you get a glass of water now. A psychiatrist that I referred a lot of people to when I lived in Kentucky used to tell clients that you get out of depression by putting one foot in front of the other, whether you feel like it or not. The cure is not quick and it's not easy, but you put one foot in front of the other and then you drag the other foot up and plop it down in front of you. Dr. O'Connor said, you literally and figuratively walk your way out of depression. Now, I'm not saying that that's a cure-all, but I am saying that it is the most effective cure. Nothing cures all. Some people deal with depression all the time. But the best cure is to walk vigorously for 30 minutes a day in sunlight, which is one of the things that profoundly depressed people don't want to do. When I'm helping someone with depression, I insist that they get dressed up for their appointment. I don't let people come in their sweats or a sweatshirt without having showered or shaved or whatever. Get dressed up like it's an important meeting. My time has value, whether you think it does or not. And wear your walking shoes, because we're going to walk while we talk. David Ketchum, our associate pastor, and I try to meet once a week to talk, both for mutual support and to coordinate our work. But when we can, we walk while we're talking because it's helpful to us. And I want you to look at these two images. The solitary figure on the beach might be doing exactly what I have just suggested. He's out walking in nature, and there is nowhere that I would rather walk than on a beach. But just check your feelings. You look at the guy alone walking on the beach, and you look at the couple walking on the beach. How do these pictures make you feel? Don't you have a visceral reaction that's more positive about this than about this, just the way you feel about it? And you can take away the prospect of romance, and you see just a bunch of friends walking together. It still viscerally feels much better than just walking alone. For that matter, take away the beach, take away the warmth, take away the prospect of romance. It's still better when you just think about yourself walking with a friend than thinking about walking alone. Now, that being said, I walk alone most of the time. I listen to news podcasts. I work out sermons and articles in my head while I'm walking alone. So I don't mean to sound like there's not tremendous benefit by spending some time in silence and solitude. But I can tell you clinically that you will never hear of a suicide from someone who is over-socialized. You will hear of lots of suicides among people who lack socialization. Now, there are people that I know that I have to get away from at times, that I've got to let my ears rest now and then. You know, there's always folks we know who can't stop talking. But even after I've gotten a little rest, I always go back. Because solitary confinement is one of the most cruel forms of punishment that we know of. Human beings evolved to be in a pack, in a tribe, in a community. We become avoidant of other people because other people can be mean. They can be ignorant, they can be cruel, dishonest, abusive. But folks, let me remind you of this. Most people aren't. Most people aren't mean. Most people aren't dishonest. Most people aren't cruel. Now, close friendship isn't easy because a really close friendship does involve a willingness to choose to give trust, to show tolerance, acceptance, and sometimes no small amount of sacrifice. I'm just telling you that you shouldn't be afraid to reinvest. Now, I don't have anything against therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, or for that matter, even pharmacists. I just think it's better not to need them. And the way to not need them is to have friends and to get vigorous exercise in natural light. We tell people in addiction recovery that if they want to regain their sobriety, that they need to change their playthings, their playmates, and their playgrounds. If you want to lead a sober life, If you worked your way into alcoholism by hanging out at a bar with your friends and playing cards, and you think you're going to go on hanging out in bars playing cards with your friends, only you're just going to drink Diet Coke, well, good luck with that. After years of sobriety, some people are able to do it, but most people, if they don't change their playthings, their playgrounds, and their playmates, they fall back into alcoholism. It's one of the reasons, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't like working with addiction because the success rate is so small. My own ego takes a beating by taking on new counseling clients in that arena because the success rate is so very, very small. But we know that one of the things that does lead to success is if you will change your playthings, your playmates, and your playgrounds. I'm trying to lose weight. I don't resent my friends that go on eating French fries and bread and stuff. I just don't hang out all day in donut shops. If you want to be sober, spend time with sober people. If you want to have a successful marriage, make close friendships with other people that want to have a successful marriage. If you know that you have some serious mental health issues, whether that's depression or phobic fears or anxieties, I'm not telling you not to see a therapist or not to take medications, but I'm saying what will help you more than the other two is to form close connections with other people who are also trying to be healthy. On one of our recent walks, David and I were talking about finishing up our current series in our adult class on getting ready for the next book. And David was a little concerned about the fact that we don't always get around to talking about the book. And we agreed that seeing a few people engage one another in serious conversation about things that matter is really the most important thing. We don't always do the book justice, but we are doing each other a great deal of good. And sometimes it doesn't feel good. I mean, some people can be irritating. Community building was never about finding a whole lot of people who agree with you on almost everything, who share your age group, your gender, your sexual orientation, your economic class, or political affiliations. Community happens when you learn to love, respect, and befriend people who are not exactly like you, who may have extremely irritating eccentricities that just happen to be ever so slightly different from your extremely irritating eccentricities. Amen. Or idiosyncrasies. The most effective prevention of suicide is not a weekly meeting with a therapist or a pill you take when you're brushing your teeth. The most effective is to have conversation partners, and not someone who's your caregiver. I'm not encouraging emotional dependence, and even though I'm obviously high on the 12-step recovery movements, but even having a sponsor, if you have to turn your sponsor into a lapdog that is taking care of you emotionally all the time, that's not really what sponsorship is all about. You need to have a conversation partner who is a real peer, a partner, a thinking, sentient partner in conversation who will tell you when you are full of it, but who will also applaud your successes. AA is comprised of pithy little wisdom sayings, and one of my favorites is, don't tell me how sick you've been, tell me how well you want to be. You may have been diagnosed as having a borderline or bipolar personality disorder, but don't take that as a license to treat your family and friends unkindly. You may have a mood disorder, and the people around you may need to understand that. I know people who are clearly sociopaths. I know that, but I still expect them to do the best that they can, while I am expecting myself to be as tolerant as possible. Because, folks, we all need one another, and we owe one another the healthiest version of ourselves that we can bring to the conversation today, recognizing that no matter what we do, we're all mad here.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.